and we are here each Wednesday night at this time, and from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And so it's coming to you from VFM out of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And so it is certainly a privilege to be able to come to you tonight. We certainly want to invite each of you to be a part of the program. And again, we want to remind you that this is certainly an interactive program. So we would love for you to share your thoughts and your ideas. And there are several ways to do so tonight. One, you can do this via WhatsApp, which is the 784-457-9994. And I think I'm told that you can do both text and call as well, a voice. So I think that's something that you can do. Also, there are two other local numbers there in St. Vincent that you can use, which would be the 457 9997. And there's another number which is 532 9997. So those are the three ways that you certainly can communicate with us. Obviously, you also can communicate with us via Facebook. And for those of you who have my link, certainly can do so. Also, I think we are also on YouTube as well. So there are several ways you can kind of keep up with the program. Last time we spoke a lot. Actually, two programs we did on what it means to be impacted by demonic influences, and we spent two programs on that. Tonight we want to shift a little bit, and like I had mentioned, that we're going to be looking a lot about parenting, looking at childhood development, and some of the impact that different, such as mental health, can have on it, poverty can have on it. So we'll be looking at a lot of those kinds of issues because I'm convinced that the home really is significant in terms of helping us to develop our personalities and our character and truly who we are. So for me, that's really important for me to for us to understand that and to focus on that. And so tonight I want to focus on the theme of poverty and childhood development. Ultimately, the overall larger thing was to begin to address some of the issues, some of the social issues about the escalation of crime and violence. And I know that there are a lot of different interpretations, there are a lot of different proposed recommendations and solutions as to how to reduce crime. So I'm kind of going around in a long roundabout way by saying the best method is to really begin to vitalize our homes, take a closer look at parenting, how we're doing that, take a closer look at the nuclear family, and begin to really ask ourselves some tough questions. Why is it that we are abandoning the divine pattern that God has set for us in terms of, and by that I mean in terms of the nuclear family? And I know sometimes circumstances do happen, things do happen, and sometimes our goals and our objectives, sometimes we have to change, we have to adapt in order to live and to survive. And I understand all of that. But it doesn't change the fact, though, that the divine pattern is still the best pattern. And so we have to begin to appreciate that and to understand why God has certainly set in motion the way He has developed the home, because I believe that the home, in fact, is feeding the local community in terms of the local churches, for example. And so the strength the strength of the family really is reflected in the local churches as well as a larger community as well. And so I want to have some discussions about that. So the first thing that I want for us to look at here tonight is the fact that the challenges of, in particular, I want to isolate low income families and to begin to talk about that, what it really means for these children who are growing up and being socialized in those low income families. Not that I'm saying that those families that are more fortunate, that economically, that they don't have some of the same kinds of issues. They do, in terms of being able to guide their children in ways to be able to be responsible citizens, because it is a very competitive world in which we live. I think our children are being exposed to the media, children are being exposed to their own peers, and there are a lot of social institutions that sometimes don't reflect the values of parents sometimes. And so it's a challenging impact. But for tonight, I want for us to talk more so primarily about low income families, and then ask ourselves, how do these children survive? How do they grow up? What are some of the expectations from these families that are being, these children that are being socialized in these families? And so I want to begin by citing a particular passage in Deuteronomy chapter 15 and verse 11. And tonight, I want to emphasize again, I'd really like for us to be more interactive tonight. I really want to invite some of you who are listening, whether you be on Facebook, wherever, however you choose to listen to the program tonight, to share your thoughts, to share your opinions. Let's kind of get involved in this. And I think your views are just as important as mine, and so I'd like for us to interact. So tonight, in Deuteronomy chapter 15 and verse 11, it says, "For the poor we will never cease to be in the land. Therefore, I command you, saying, you shall freely open your hand to your brother, to your needy and poor in your land." In other words, Moses is making, he's acknowledging that you're always going to have the poor. However, this is how I want for you to treat those who are less fortunate among you. First of all, let us begin to understand that we are brothers. Notice it says, open your hand to your brother. Of course, he's talking about our central, we have a central, a unified humanity. We have God, our Father. In this particular case, Moses is talking about Yahweh. He's our Father. He took us out of the land of Egypt. He brought us across the Red Sea. He brought us through the promise, to the wilderness, and now we're standing at the place where we are getting ready to go over into the land of Canaan. Of course, Moses was not that fortunate to accompany them across the Jordan, but nonetheless, he's giving them some final words of advice, how to live in this new land, in this new settlement. And one of the things that he mentioned is that, yes, there are going to be those among you who are less fortunate, just like it is today, just like it is in St. Vincent. There are some families in St. Vincent that are doing very well. There are other families that are just surviving marginally. But there are other families tonight that don't have some of the basic necessities to survive in not just in St. Vincent, but globally as well. And so there are real human suffering that are out there. But especially, I want for us to focus primarily on those children that are so vulnerable. And so, but the parents, the people that they look to provide them security, to provide them love and comfort and all of the basic necessities that they need to continue their growth and development, that these parents, there are parents out there that don't have some of the basic necessities to begin to hold a family together. And so we've got to understand that. So Moses is cognizant of this, and he's warning them here. He said, look, let me read it again. Deuteronomy chapter 15 and verse 5. "For the poor will never cease to be in the land." And this is a fact. I think when you look at, the United States or some of the larger, more developed countries, there's still a large amount of poverty that still exists. There are in New York City, there's still homeless people on the street, especially this is winter time right now, that don't have adequate housing, don't have, of course, in the case of New York, they're now opening up a lot of shelters so that these homeless people can have some indoor facilities where they can protect themselves against the winter, the cold. But there are other countries, especially, of course, St. Vincent and the Caribbean don't have to deal with the excessive cold, obviously. But still, there are still basic challenges there, and in terms of children, how they're being raised and what they need to do. So Moses is giving the advice here, and I think this advice stands here for us as well. And he's simply saying, look, let us not forget those who are vulnerable among us. Let us not forget those who are poor. Let us not forget those who are not as fortunate as some of you will be. And I think that this advice is still applicable to us today. And so we have to begin to, in particularly as a Christian community, we have to begin to look out for our brothers and sisters. And sometimes I think we are more prone to rationalize why certain people are poor, why certain people are at the place where they are. And so we use our own intellectual rationalization to justify not reaching out to our brothers and sisters and to begin to offer them tangible help so that they can move forward and take be able to care for their families and their children as well. So that's kind of the passage that I want for us to is focus on. Then I want for us to. I'm going to look at some passages first before I look at some of what the sociologists are telling us and some of the researchers are telling us in terms of the impact of poverty on our families. So in James chapter 1 and verse 27, James says, pure and undefiled religion in the sight of God, in the sight of God, and Father, is this, is to visit the orphans, the widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. And so James is categorizing, in his definition, and like I said, James is a real practical person. And I think part of his approach really is because his brother, he grew up with Jesus, his brother, and he understood the teachings and the philosophy of Jesus, and so he's able to now share this with the Christian community. And he says, look, this is how you define religion. If you want to be religious, if you think that you're spiritual, here are some tests here. And he says, look, test yourself. He said, I want for you to begin to, spend time caring for the orphans and the widows. It's interesting that the word visit here, it's the same root word that we get for pastors, elders, for example, who are told to shepherd and to feed the flock. And so here we're told that those who claim that they're religious, that they will make it a priority to visit the orphans, to visit the widows, those who are in distress, those who are troubled, those who are the most vulnerable among you. You ought to make them a priority in terms of what you do. And James defined this as evidence of a person who is truly religious. Of course, the next part of that, there's two aspects to it. The second part of that is to keep oneself unspotted from the world. In other words, don't allow covetousness, don't allow selfishness, don't allow greed, don't allow the ways of the world to so dominate your life so that you begin to rationalize that in order to make a living, you have to climb on the backs of others in order to get to the top, to trample over others. And of course, sometimes we kind of find ways to rationalize, this whole idea of making a living And when your definition of making a living is the exploitation of others, James is simply saying that this is not religion. This is not spirituality. This is not holiness. This is not reflective of who Jesus and God truly is, because we ought to care for each other and to look out for each other. Just like God has showered on us his grace, he has showered on us his blessings, he has given us forgiveness, he has demonstrated his love and his compassion for us. He's asking us to do the same for those who are less fortunate. And when we talk about less fortunate, we're talking about real physical suffering. We're talking about orphans. We're talking about widows. We're talking about real human suffering, those who are in distress. And so James is simply saying that true religion is to make these individuals, those who are vulnerable, a priority in your life, the way you practice your religion, the way you practice your faith. And so this principle here, I find in James chapter 1 and verse 27, is also coming off the recommendation that Moses made to the children of Israel when he acknowledged that the poor would always be among us. But he says, look, you ought to help your brother out. You ought to look out for each other. And so that to me is still the biblical principle. And so what is lacking in our 21st century, in our modern world today, is the notion of individualism. And we couple individualism with selfishness and greed. And so we expect each person to look out for themselves. And we have a saying that says, crop or smoke your pipe. You understand? If you find yourself at the bottom of all of this, because somebody is going to climb on the top of you. And so if you look at the internet, the level of scamming and deception that is happening, and some of the most vulnerable are the elderly. These are the ones that people are exploiting. And so James is simply saying that is truly contradictory to religion. And so let us begin to understand. Let us begin to understand what New Testament Christianity is, and truly what the gospel is. It is truly about looking out for each other and looking out for our brothers and sisters. And so in Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 31, and I quote this from the New International Version, it says, he who oppresses the poor shows contempt for their maker, but whosoever is kind to the needy honors God. In other words, whenever you oppress the poor, whenever you take advantage for those who are most vulnerable in our society, the proverb writer is simply saying that this is contempt to the maker, which is God himself. And then it says, but whosoever is kind to the needy honors God. And so, we have a lot of altruistic institutions. I mean, Salvation is one of those. They always seem to be there. Whenever there's an earthquake, whenever there's a hurricane, whatever it is, this is an organization that is dedicated specifically to alleviating human suffering and human pain. And so it's also interesting how, especially in large countries, how they will go in and they will destroy an entire community, and then they'll go in after that and dump a lot of money trying to bring it back together. And sometimes it's sort of like, it's paradoxical, it's sort of contradictory when you think about it. When you look at what's going on in between Russia and the Ukraine right now, where both sides are bent on destroying each other, which they're doing. And then after all of this, then the other nations are going to come, demonstrating how altruistic they are, how kind they are, and they're going to begin to rebel and put a lot of monies in and all of that stuff. Question is, why don't we do it before? Why don't we stop all of this rather than destroying and then have to go back in later? But that's what's going to happen at some point when they decide to stop firing at each other. The other nations are going to come in and they're going to try to, build back the bridges and build back the buildings and do a lot of stuff with other taxpayers' money. So you take your taxpayers' money, fuel the jets, and you go and you bomb and you destroy all the buildings, and then you take taxpayers' money and go back and rebuild the buildings, rebuild everything. It doesn't really make any sense to me, in terms of how we allocate, taxpayers' money. And when one man can kind of decide, what the country's resources, how are they going to be allocated, and what are we going to do with it? And we're going to take our monies that we've been allocated, and we're going to go and destroy an entire nation, destroy an entire country. And then we're going to come back again and somehow rebuild. That's where we are. And so, but what we have to understand, that the people who are most vulnerable are the ones who are going to be the hardest hit in all of these situations. I would imagine that in Russia, in the Ukraine, that the people who are the hardest hit are going to be the people who are the poorest and the people who have no other alternative. I mean, there are people in those countries who can get an eject. And we've seen this in even some of the small islands. There are certain people who get sick and they're able to jump on a helicopter, they're able to jump on a plane, and they're able to go to Canada and get surgery and do. But there are individuals who don't have that. They don't have those choices because they're vulnerable. And so I want you to think tonight, not just of those families that don't have. I want you to think about the children that are being socialized in those families. And what are their hopes? What are their aspirations? As they begin to put their character together and their personalities together, what is it that they have in it that gives them hope, gives them faith to begin to believe that good things can happen? Because if you are a child and you're recognizing your parents in a situation where they're completely hopeless, where they can't provide you some of the basic necessities of life, what is it that these children are going to come away with in terms of hope and expectation? If the people that they relied on and trust for their security, for their nurturing, for their guidance, for their stability, if the children conclude that these people are powerless to help themselves much as to help us, I ask you, what do you expect the psyche of those children that are being socialized in those kinds of environment? And so when we start talking about how we're going to reduce crime and violence, what are some of the things that we need to do? These are some of the conversation that we need to have, at that level, because until we are beginning to address those basic issues, we're still going to have the problem, because ultimately we're going to wind up warehousing these children when they become adolescent and older in prisons, and we're going to build bigger prisons, basically. That doesn't fix the problem. The problem is to begin to go back earlier and see how these children are being socialized. And so that's why I quoted what Moses said to the children of Israel. When you get over into the land with milk and honey, I want you to understand that there are still going to be some folks there that are not able to access all that milk and honey for whatever reason. It may be because of mental disabilities. It may be because of physical disabilities. I don't know, whatever those circumstances are going to be, but there are going to be real challenges. There are still physical disabilities. There are people who are born blind. There are people who are born with mobility issues, severe mobility issues. There's still kids that are struggling with learning disabilities that aren't really going to be able to take advantage of all of the opportunities this modern world have to offer. And so what is to become of those children? What is to become of those families that don't have the resources to be able to nurture those children? Because there are very serious challenges. When you have a child that doesn't have the ability to speak, may have some severe physical disabilities, or maybe struggling with learning disability, and you don't have the financial resources to provide this child with the kind of care and challenge and services that she needs or he needs in order to overcome those disabilities, it sets them back even further. And what it means is educationally, they won't be able to function well. And there are a lot of other areas that they wouldn't be able to function well. And so what we are as a society, and especially as a Christian community, we have to begin to listen to James, listen to Moses. He says, look, you've got to care for those who are most vulnerable among you. Don't talk about Christianity. Don't talk about how righteous you are. Don't talk about religion until you can demonstrate it in your community by caring for those who are less fortunate, those who have been marginalized, those who may even be oppressed in your communities. You have to begin to demonstrate how powerful the gospel is. Yes, it's the new news. It's the gospel that transforms lives. Well, you have to market that in a practical way to individuals. And like I said, there are many challenges, and there are challenges across the board. There may be neurological challenges that children are facing. There may be psychiatric challenges that children are facing. There may be physical mobility issues that children are facing. And not just children, but the parents themselves may be facing some of these basic challenges as well. And so that the compound, not only does the children have those issues, but the parents themselves that are the guardian of these children may have some of these basic issues as well. And so as a community, we have to begin to look at how we're going to face some of these challenges as we begin to go through. So please remember those verses that I'm showing you in Matthew, and this is Jesus himself speaking. And I think it's important for us to listen to Jesus. And here's what he says in Matthew chapter 25, verses 34. And I'll read a couple of verses. It says, then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you before the foundation of the world. Verse 35, for I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invite me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to see me. Now, this is Jesus talking at this particular point. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did I see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did I see you as a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? When did I see you sick or in prison and come to you? And then the king will answer and say to them, truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it to one of these brothers of mine, even the least of them, you have done it to me. Now that's gospel, because this is Jesus himself. And Jesus is saying here in this story that whenever you turn your back on a brother or a sister in need, you turn your back on me. Whenever you fail to help a brother or sister that is hungry, you turn your back on me. I mean, these are core, these are basic things, the hallmark of what it truly means to develop and to cultivate the mind of Christ. You know, it was Paul in Philippians chapter 2 and verse 5 that says, let this mind be in you as was also in Christ Jesus. And so that's why I like to read from the book of James, because James understood this. That's why James says true religion is to visit the orphan, to care for those who are being marginalized, to care for those who have been excluded from the wealth of this world, to care for those who have been exploited, been oppressed. He says, these are the people you ought to make a priority. But while you're doing this, ensure that you keep your life clean from the ways of the world. And in this context, we can say covetousness, the whole spirit of capitalism, where you must get to the top. And you really, it's like Malcolm X once said, by any means necessary, And so we have that philosophy of any means necessary. How do I get to the top? And there are those who will even feel justified by taking criminal action in order to get to the top financially. And so they don't mind stealing. They don't mind breaking into stores. And I mean, where I work, I mean, half the population there are there for some, theft, criminal activities of stealing. And they rationalized that when I'm hungry, it is quite appropriate for me to break into somebody's house and take whatever they have. And in the process, in the commission of that, even terminate their life. This is where people are. People sometimes use their need in order to rationalize, taking criminal action, criminal activities. And so we're always going to have this kind of, and so what we do, we build bigger prisons in order to store them and to keep them. So tonight, what I'm saying is that the beauty and power of New Testament Christianity is in the transformation of others. And so sometimes as we have this discussion, I want you to remember this, that it's not so much about what parents are doing to children as it is who they really are. That's the issue. And I think sometimes we spend more emphasis looking at what parents are doing to children rather than looking at who these parents really are at their core. Because that's where the remedial work begins, is to look at a person's character, look at who they really are. Because ultimately, we can't help but being who we are. And that's what children are truly experience. Children experience more so about who you are rather than what you do, because sometimes, who you are comes first and what happens later comes after that. But that's where we need to be looking at. It's who you are, your character, what's driving you, where you're coming from, what's the foundation that you're standing on, what's your philosophy of life, how do you see yourself, how do you interpret others, how do you see them? All these are critical questions and things that I think that are very important for us to begin to understand. So these passages, I think, in this Matthew passage, Matthew 25, Proverbs chapter 14, the Deuteronomy passage that I gave you earlier, and the James passage, I think all of these passages are quite important for us to understand. But I also want to now spend some time looking at, the Christian community itself. I mean, the first century Christian community. I'm not talking about the Christian community of the 21st century that we are seeing today. I want for us to spend some time looking at the first century Christianity as a model, because I think that model, it's really important for us to understand that model. And I think if we can understand that model, I think it certainly will help us to understand. I want to say good night to Sherry. It's certainly a privilege to have you on the program tonight. Make sure I don't miss anybody. Keitha, it's certainly a privilege to have you. It's cold where you are right now, because it's cold in here where I am, and I'm at 8 hours from you, obviously, south of you, obviously. So it's a little colder there. And I know Kamal is even further south of us, so he's basking in the sunshine there in SVG, although it might be raining there.
Oh,
I think from
it's
what
all bright and
Mr.
sunny.
Thompson said, right?
Bright and sunny with some little rain in between.
Okay, so rain in between. Okay. So that's great. At least I'd rather have the little rain in between right now. And but Sherry's also enjoying the sunshine there where she's at in Florida as well. So some of us are in better location right now, enjoying better weather. But let's just spend some time looking at the first century Christian community, and let's use this as the model, basically, as to what we're trying to duplicate. We have within the Churches of Christ, there is this well, not just the Churches of Christ, because I think it was first said within the Presbyterian, and I think it was Campbell, Alexander Campbell, who first Thomas Campbell rather, who first made this statement, which says, let us speak where the Bible speak, and let us remain silent where the Bible is silent. And at that time when he made that, I think he was a Presbyterian minister, I think in Pennsylvania. And so he made, and I think after that statement become really popular in terms, let us speak where the Bible speak and remain silent where the Bible is silent. So, and I think much of Christianity today is really trying to do that. At least that's what they say, but in practice, it may not necessarily turn out that way. But let's look at the first century Christian. And I think the best place to do that is to look at Acts chapter 2 and reading from verse 41 and kind of looking at those verses. Stephanie, it's certainly a privilege to have you tonight. Good night to you as well. Florence, is good night to you. Most of you who are here tonight. So certainly we can interact that way as well, but nice to have all of you here with us here tonight. But let's look at this passage in Acts chapter 2 and verse 41. So then those who had received the word were baptized, and that day there were added about 3,000 souls. I want for you to, if you're in St. Vincent, I want for you to envision this. You're at Victoria Park in St. Vincent, Victoria Park. And there's a gospel meeting there. And 3,000 people decided that they were going to become Christians. So obviously, they're going to have to go down to the, go down to the river somewhere. I don't know, maybe to Penniston somewhere, or Vermont, or not Vermont, to down on the beach, maybe Kittell's Beach. Go down to the Kittell's Beach. And I want for you to imagine, 3,000 people that day getting baptized at the Kittell's Beach. 3,000 people. And then those 3,000 people decided that they're going to hang together for a while. They're going to really enjoy each other and have fellowship together because something exciting has happened in their life. They found Jesus and they're excited about this. So that's what happened in verse 41. Verse 42 says, and they continually devoting themselves to the apostles' teachings and to the fellowship. In other words, these people just came together and was just really studying God's word, making the application, taking the Torah, looking at the verses, making the connection between what had happened to them, what they'd heard in terms of Jesus. And so and then having fellowship, koinonia. In other words, they were enjoying each other. And then he says, breaking bread and to prayer. So now you have these 3,000. Obviously, if it's 3,000 baptized, we know that at least you had maybe another 120 people there. It may have even been more than that, because I'm suspecting that in this 3,000, you may have husbands and wives, you may have children. A number is large, I would think, at this particular point. And now these people are having fellowship together. They're enjoying each other, and you got to understand, I say enjoying each other. I know in Pentecost, at least there were about 21 different nations, different languages, people, different culture were present at this particular time. So all of these people have their cultural differences, different regions that they're from, And now they're all together. And the one thing that held them together was Jesus and his truth, the truth that he has presented. So this held them together, which is the apostles' teachings. The apostles were teaching not about themselves. They were teaching that Jesus is the Son of God. He came into their world. He died for them so that they can be saved. And so they said, here we are. What can we do? And they accepted Jesus, and 3,000 became Christians. And then it says in verse 43, and everyone kept feeling a sense of joy. And that's one of the interesting things. You know, when a person is truly converted, there's a sense of joy. And this joy tonight, I want for us to understand that this joy doesn't just stay in the church building. Doesn't just when you go home at night, the joy goes with you. And mom and dad are still in a mode of celebration, one of gratitude, where they're thanking God for everything that is given to them, where their children are the benefactor of this joy that mom and dad are celebrating and enjoying, so that it goes from the building, from the church, from the location that they're worshiping. As they go home, they didn't stop having the joy. The joy is internal. The joy is part of their psyche. And that's why I said earlier, if you remember, I said, it's not about what parents do to children. It is more about who those parents are. In other words, the joy comes from inside, the transformation that had happened. So when it says on Pentecost that they were all rejoicing and they were all celebrating, that's what it was talking about. It was talking about mom has a sense of joy. That joy is expressed in a transactional way with her husband. And then the husband then transfers his joy to the mom, and the children are the benefactor of that. And so in that home, there is an abiding sense of joy because of the joy that is planted in them. And so it's not so much of what mom and dad is doing to the children as it is what mom and dad has become. They've been transformed, that there's a love that they have for each other that is deeply embedded in the heart of each other. There is a love that mom has for dad, and that there's a love that dad has for mom, and that love is flowing over, and the children are enjoying that. And that's awesome. You see how contradictory it is when you have in a home domestic violence, when you have in a home where mom and dad seem to be so religious, they go to church, they're in the choir, they do all of this stuff, and yet they go home and they cuss and they beat each other and they become nasty. And children who are there are acting like they're not listening while they're playing on their iPhone, playing on their tablet and stuff, and they're hearing mom yelling at the top of her lungs with the F-bomb, and dad is like calling all nastiness. And yet Sunday morning, these folks all get dressed up and get in the car and they go to church and they become saints, and the children are sitting in the back seat, wondering what in the world has happened, and so church becomes nothing more than a game to children. And so these children has already been turned off. They couldn't wait to get away from mom and dad, to begin to live their own lives. And this is traumatic, disastrous. And so what I'm saying to us is, within the first century Christian community, we saw that there is a joy that kept people together. There was a sense of happiness. It wasn't so much about you're rich and I'm poor, or you're black and I'm white, you're tall and fat. It wasn't about those distinctions. What held them together was the transformation and the implanting of Jesus. And that, in essence, enhances their relationship. And there was a genuine joy that these individuals experienced. And so tonight, I certainly want to welcome Gaff. It's certainly a privilege to have you with us here tonight. It's awesome to have you here as well. So, and good night to all of you as well. So in verse 33, verse 43 of Acts chapter 2, I read it again. It says, everyone kept feeling a sense of awe, a sense of joy. And then it says, many wonders and signs were taking place through the apostles. You know, as these leaders became so infectious with the Holy Spirit dwelling in them, that the kinds of things that they were doing, it attracted people to them, and that there was a hallelujah that ring out in the hearts of men and women that kept them together. And that's what we are lacking in our society today. We have allowed individualism. We have allowed the spirit of capitalism. We have allowed greed. We have allowed, selfishness to dominate our lives. And some of us have even used greed and selfishness to rationalize taking advantage of our brothers and sisters. We become nothing more than parasites, feeding on others instead of being there for those who are vulnerable, those who are needy among us, to help our children. As I mentioned, I want to keep saying this. There are children tonight that don't have food. There are children tonight that don't have adequate health care. And some of these children are vulnerable in the sense that they have certain disabilities. There are children tonight that have physical disabilities that probably will never walk. There are children tonight that will never see, blind. There are children tonight that are dumb. There are children tonight that are suffering from learning disability, where education is going to be a challenge for them. But their parents doesn't have the financial resources to hire tutors, to hire doctors, to get some of the best things that they need, even with getting a simple wheelchair for some of these children to be able to move around in the first place where they live. You may have 3 or 5 children living in a room, in just a single room without no plumbing. This is the 21st century, but it is still existing in St. Vincent. And I would suspect certain places in the United States as well. There are real human suffering. Then you have to ask ourselves, how are these children to grow up? Because the first failure is that these children have to internalize the fact that the people who they turn to for their security, for their joy, themselves are incapable of caring for themselves. Then these children sooner or later have to develop a plan to survive. And that plan could be, I have to go out there and help mommy. I may have to steal, or I may have to just shut down, or I may just have to commit. So, teenage suicide is an increase. And part of that coming out of this COVID situation, because so many parents are unemployed and they're home and they're about to lose their homes. Bad things are happening. Children are there feeling the weight of the emptiness, the weight of hopelessness and meaninglessness. That weight is enough to cause these children to give up. And their giving up maybe turn internally and themselves, which shows up in depression, anxiety disorder, or it may turn way out where our children begin to use criminal activities in order to get over and to survive. But sooner or later, they wind up in the criminal justice system. And we see it all the time. And so we have as a people, have to develop a care for each other and to understand what's really happening. In verse 44 of Acts chapter 2, it says, and all those who had believed were together and had all things in common. verse 45. And they began selling their property and possession and were sharing them with all. That's the Christian community. Now, so you say, this is communism here. This is socialism here. Okay? Because here, these folks, this Christian community here, this model here. Remember I said, speak where the Bible speaks and remain silent where the Bible is silent? Well, here's a good place, isn't it? It says these Christians, those who were privileged to have, sold on what they had in order to alleviate and to feed and to clothe those who didn't have, so that the joy can continue. See, the problem is, how do you infect others? How do you keep the joy going? And the way you keep the joy going is to make sure everybody is at least have an opportunity to enjoy and to experience the joy. Now, does it mean that this we are sanctioning laziness? No, because some folks are not lazy. You know, I said many years ago when I was doing a presentation, and I said, you know, those people who are the poorest tend to work the hardest. And the people who seem to be at the top, they work the less. And that's a fact. So it's not that people who are poor are lazy. It's just that there may be circumstances in their life that has caused them to be at a certain level. And they work harder than the people who have, you know? I mean, you know, the person, you think about this, you know, the person who's out there cleaning your yard and doing all of this stuff and doing everything, and you on your computer, just pushing 2 or 3 buttons, and you make $30,000 just pushing 2 or 3 buttons. And this person is cleaning and doing all this work for 7 hours, and he's only making about $10 for the whole day. And that's what it is. So sometimes it's not that people are lazy. It just be that because of the way they were socialized, the opportunities, so that when the opportunities come, they can't take advantage of it because they don't have what it takes to take advantage of the opportunity. I just saw, I was walking with a young man this evening before I came home from work. And usually when you do a psychosocial, you try to get a history of the person, you know, and when he unfolds a history, you know, and he said, I asked one of the questions, what was your highest education? He says the 9th grade. Well, obviously, if you drop out of the 9th grade, obviously, you know that there is going to be some problems down the road. Okay. Later, when he became an adult, he went back and he got his GED. But your GED can only take you so far, basically. But at the same time, he has to work, so he can't really go back to college, can't do any of that stuff. And eventually, he decided to take some shortcuts. And the shortcuts, of course, he's now in the criminal justice system. But it's not that he didn't want to do the right thing. It's just that he rationalized that, you know what, I got to do something to get me where I need to be over here. Because all the images that people see is that America is a place you can get what you want. But there are certain structural barriers. And those structural barriers may not necessarily be racism. Those structural barriers may be the way you were raised, the way you were socialized. And if you were socialized a certain way and you were never given the opportunities to be able to go, you know, there's some parents tonight that do have the ability to give their 6-year-old, you know, piano lesson, you know, be able to give their 6-year-old, you know, to go to the gym and do a lot of different stuff and give extra lesson, maybe get a speech teacher or you know, a lot of different stuff that they can do. Or they could drive their youngsters to the soccer field. But guess what? There are parents out there that they can't even afford the textbooks. They can't even afford the uniform, the school uniform. They can't even afford the sneakers, the shoe to go to school. There are real situations out there. And even if those children sometimes can get to school, they may have learning disabilities, but their parents doesn't have the money to hire a tutor in order to help them to come along. These children are still going to have those situations. So when they really get out from all of this, When the opportunities come before them, they may not be able to take it. For example, the person who has a GED or drop out of high school may not be able to get promotion at his job because he may need the person who has a higher degree will get that job. And so it's going to continue to have an impact throughout their life and may even have an impact on their children, the way they choose to raise their children in terms of what's valuable for them. So those are just some of the issues tonight that we really need to be talking about some of the real issues and what we can do as a local community, whether it be a church or whatever, clubs that you're in. How can let's stop looking to the government for all the answers. Let us form ourselves as a community of people to see how we can make our neighborhood better, how we can begin to maybe get some of the young people to start cleaning the street and pay them and do whatever, some extra money, so give them something to do instead of looking to the government to provide everything, because the government can't provide everything. We as a people have to be responsible enough. Maybe you can take a street and dedicate that street and say, this is my street, and we're going to keep this street clean. And if everybody decides to do that within a community, we can begin to teach our young people what it truly means to be good citizens, to care about themselves, and to care for each other. And if we can do all of this, I believe that we certainly can make a difference. So I didn't get very far tonight, but verse 47 says, praising God and having favor with all the people, and the Lord added to their number day by day. See, God is with us always. And that's part of the problem with our society. We have eclipsed God from our way of doing business. It's looked like God is no longer welcome in the 21st century. And so because of that, we're trying to do things by ourselves, and it will never work. The first century Christians were successful because they were in partnership with God. They collaborated together. And because of that, they were able to access all of the powers of heaven and all of the powers that they had, and they joined together and they were able to transform lives. I believe that we can do the same as well as they did in the first century. I believe our marriages can be better. We can be better parents. We can be better citizens, but we have to begin to understand the patterns and how we are. As I said earlier, I want to end with this statement. It's not what the parents do to the children. It is who those parents are. And that's really what's important, because who you are speaks about your character, who you are inside. And that's what's going to come out for your children. So I want to thank each of you tonight for being here tonight. I want to thank Yolanda for being here, Sherry for being here, Juliet for being here, Daph for being here, Stephanie for being here, Florence and Keitha, and all the wonderful good people who've been here tonight. It's such a privilege to have you. Certainly, Kamal, you've been silent, and I certainly appreciate. I saw you fell asleep. You know that, right?
No, I didn't.
Okay, that's okay. I saw you sleeping.
I'm tired, yes, but I didn't fall asleep, man.
Yeah, you were sleeping. That's okay. Huh?
If I was sleeping, that would be okay, right?
I know, right? but it is fun, man. But I'm envious though. I really appreciate you in the sunny St. Vincent right now.
Well, not right now.
I'm up north here.
Now, as in terms of during the day and so forth, things like that. Because it was hot today. It was
hot today, right?
It was hot today.
Well, right now though, I'd rather have the heat right today.
Some people would rather have the cold and say it's easier getting warm than being hot and trying to get cooled. Cool down.
That's true. Well, I like it in New York for the mere fact that you get 3 months of 3 months of spring, 3 months of. I like that. It changes. I enjoy that.
Oh, I like my rain and my sunshine.
You like your rain and your sunshine?
Yeah.
Okay, come on. It's been a pleasure, man.
All right, you take care. Thanks a lot.
Again, I want to thank all of you on Facebook. It's certainly a privilege to have all of you. Daph, thank you, and Sherry, and and well, wonderful folks there in SVG and in New Jersey and Canada and Florida and all you wonderful folks. So see you all next Wednesday night, same time, same place. Bye bye. God
Thank
bless.
you very much. Thank you very much. 3 minutes after 10 o'clock here in the Eastern Caribbean, you will listen to the Full and Abundant Life radio program with Dr. Claudius Davis. The Full and Abundant Life radio program comes your way each and every Wednesday from 9 until 10. To join him again next Wednesday, right here on the Clean Fresh Song for another Full and Abundant Life radio program. Well, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, it's also my time to bid you goodbye for yet another Wednesday. And so